In the early morning hours of August 19, 1984, a Virginia state trooper answered his front door and was ambushed. In an attack lasting no more than 3 minutes, he was fatally stabbed more than 40 times in front of his wife, brother, sister-in-law, as well as his toddler daughter, who had been asleep in bed with him prior to the attack. From the over-the-top disguises left behind at the crime scene to suspects no one would expect, the case almost feels like something out of a movie. For Johnny and those who loved him, it was heartbreakingly real. His little girl grew up to follow in his footsteps into a career in law enforcement, and today she remains determined to uncover the truth about her father's killer or killers. I'm your host, Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved murder of Virginia State Trooper Johnny Rush Bowman. Saturday, August 18th, 1984 had been a busy day for Virginia State Trooper Johnny Bowman. He had worked a double shift patrolling the Prince William County Fair. He arrived home that evening to spend a little bit of time with family, but mostly to catch up on some sleep. He parked his police vehicle in the driveway and went inside. Johnny's brother and sister-in-law were in town visiting, and it was their first time seeing Johnny's home. In addition to having those house guests, when he arrived home that evening, Johnny's wife Terry had a friend over, a woman named Melanie Worrell, who was the wife of Johnny's colleague and good friend, a fellow Virginia State Trooper named Perry Worrell. And also in the home was Johnny's pride and joy, his 2-year-old daughter, Ashley Nicole, who went by Nikki. This made for quite the full house. The Bowmans lived in a townhome in the 8900 block of Patterson Place in Manassas, Virginia. I wasn't able to see any photos of the layout of their particular townhome, but I was able to find the neighborhood and get a feel for it based on maps and photos of other townhomes that had recently been sold in the area. The Bowmans had a 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath, 2-story townhome that was connected to others, though theirs appears to be an end unit. These were those row house-style townhomes. Manassas is a great location for DC commuters. It's only 30 miles southwest of DC, and the city itself has its own vibe to it with a lot of history. Johnny had grown up in another part of Virginia, 4 hours away. It's this small town of Dublin in Pulaski County. And now that he was 6 years into working with the Virginia State Police and assigned to the Independent Hill office, he and his family were trying to build a life there. As Terry continued visiting with Melanie, Johnny made his way up to bed. It was then that his daughter Nikki asked if she could sleep with her dad in his bed, which he agreed to and is super sweet. Sometime after this, Terry drove Melanie back home, and she would later say she didn't want to bother Johnny and Nikki, so she just fell asleep on the couch. That sleep would be interrupted around 4:15 a.m. on the morning of Sunday, August 19th. A doorbell rang, and Terry stated that she looked out the window and didn't see anything, so she laid back down to go back to sleep, but just moments later, the doorbell began ringing again. At this time, she heard her husband Johnny coming down the stairs. Some sources state that Terry asked him not to open the door, but I couldn't find a direct quote from her saying that to any type of publication, so we don't know that for sure. According to Terry, Johnny opened the door. In some sources, it's reported that prior to him opening the door, she heard the voice on the other side say, "I'm from the expletive power company." And in some it says that she heard the expletive and then the person say they were from the power company. It's not fully clear, and it's possible that those words were being said as Johnny was already opening the door. But either way, The moment Johnny opened the door, Terry stated that he was ambushed. It was pitch black in the foyer of the home, so Terry said she could not see the assailant and she did not recognize his voice. In just 3 short minutes, Johnny was stabbed 42 times all over his body. Terry simultaneously screamed for help from her brother-in-law and his wife upstairs. According to Bobby Bowman, Johnny's brother, he got a look at the attacker as he got to the top of the stairwell, and it was just a shadowy figure to him in the dark. He raced down the stairs, yelling at the intruder to leave his brother alone. The two reportedly slipped in Johnny's blood as they grappled for a moment, but the attacker then got away and ran away on foot. Something corroborated by evidence, as there were large bloody shoe prints leading away from the townhome. While this was happening, Terry Bowman was on the phone with 911. There were 2 911 calls, which I couldn't locate why there were 2 separate phone calls, just that the second one was around 4:18 a.m. In the call, she reportedly said, "They are killing my husband." Terry actually had to run by the attacker to get to the phone and get within feet of what was happening. Some people have scrutinized that language of "they are killing my husband." Could be implying that there was more than one person there, or it could just be that she was talking generally. It's hard to say. First responders arrived almost immediately, and with the lights turned on, the severity of what had just happened became evident. Just a content warning, this next part and a few others where I describe Johnny's injuries get a little graphic. Johnny was curled up in the fetal position, covered in blood, and the blood had sprayed all over the walls and it was pooling on the floor. It was just brutal. Johnny was rushed to Prince William Hospital where he was pronounced dead 45 minutes after the attack took place. Everyone who knew Johnny was shocked. Repeatedly in articles, he was described as an upstanding guy, mild-mannered, kept to himself, kind, not arrogant, a homebody, stayed out of trouble, a perfect police record, you name it. He had served 6 years in the Marines before going into law enforcement. Around 1,400 people came out to his funeral, including hundreds of Virginia state troopers with black bands across their badge. Katie Bolton, the wife of Virginia state trooper Michael Bolton, told the Potomac News, quote, "Johnny was not just a state trooper. Johnny was a kind man. No, kind isn't it. A lot of people are kind. He was more than that. I don't want him remembered only as a state trooper. He was more than that. When he came home, Terry, and Nikki, they were everything to him." End quote. Johnny's friend and colleague Perry Worrell then told the paper, "He was the nicest person. I know everybody always says that, but with Johnny, it was true. He was like a brother to me. I'm not going to be able to talk about him, but for a few minutes." And then his voice trailed off, and he was having a hard time collecting himself and not getting choked up. It was then that Katie Bolton kind of interjected to save the conversation and said, "The best way to describe Johnny is that people could not like him. There was nothing about him not to like. I didn't even know him long. 5 years." End quote. Neighbors described Johnny as a handyman, a family man who on weekends could be seen maintaining his yard, playing outside with his daughter, or washing his car. He had few friends outside of his tight circle at the police department. His wife Terry was a security officer at the IBM plant in Manassas. Another wife of a state trooper who wanted to go unnamed told the Potomac News, "He was easygoing and soft-spoken. He laughed at everything. Instead of getting upset, he would laugh. I can't ever remember him getting mad. Laid back. That's what he is, laid back." She also recalled how Terry told her right after the murder, "We called him Big John. He's trusting. Too trusting. You know Johnny, he just opened the door." And he was called Big John for a reason. He was about 6'2", 180 pounds. He was lanky but muscular and frequently worked out. One person described him as having sleepy eyes, and I see what they mean when looking at his picture. He just certainly has soft features and a kind vibe about him. One of his former roommates said, quote, "He was a quiet guy, an extremely nice guy. He had the ability to get along with anybody. Even if you tried to dislike him, you couldn't do it. He was just a nice country boy," end quote. And when I tell you, that is just the tip of the iceberg of the thoughts that were shared about Johnny. There are just tons of quotes out there, and they all kind of share the same vibe, the same essence of who Johnny was and how he had led his life. The senseless murder of one of their own created a deep drive to solve his murder, and to do so, investigators would have to be all hands on deck. The investigation is a bit tricky because he worked for law enforcement in the state police, so the FBI was pulled in instantly, and Manassas police investigated as well. 18 to 20 special agents, which was roughly 20% of the force's non-narcotics investigators, were assigned to the case at all times. They were tasked with not only studying the physical evidence, but also digging into every last detail of Johnny Bowman's personal and professional life. For $1,082 a week, 4 rooms at the Holiday Inn in Manassas served as a home base for the task force. Here is what the investigation revealed about Johnny's injuries and how the attack took place. The weapon used was a switchblade-style knife with a 4-inch blade. This murder weapon was never found despite a 3-day land and air search around the crime scene. As soon as Johnny Bowman opened the door, they believe that the first thrusts of the knife caught Johnny Bowman in his upper chest, puncturing his pulmonary artery. Then they stabbed him in the stomach. At this point, Johnny doubled over and the killer stabbed him in his face, shoulder, back, and neck. The force of this and his blood loss made Johnny collapse to the floor, where the killer stood over him and stabbed him in the arms and legs as Johnny lay motionless in the fetal position. Johnny's brother Bobby briefly scuffled with the killer, but interestingly enough, the killer did not stab his brother at all in this altercation. Bobby described this man as a large black man. What is even crazier is what was found at the scene. The source material doesn't say if these items were found just outside of the house or in the foyer of the townhome, just that they were at the scene. There was a beige hard hat, a curly auburn-colored wig, and non-prescription aviator-style glasses. Some sources describe them as sunglasses, and some as just regular glasses. And I do think that this detail is significant because remember that Terry and Bobby as witnesses were saying that it was too dark in the foyer to even make out anything about the attacker. So I think it would be an odd choice for the killer to wear sunglasses because then he really couldn't see. And just going off of that, with how dark they were describing it, it's hard for me to imagine how this killer just landed all of those stab wounds with such poor visibility. Assuming this was all part of a disguise, the investigators thought this told a lot and they wanted to learn more about the items. To put it into perspective, because of the brutality of the attack, some of the early theories were that the perpetrator was on drugs or having some sort of severe mental episode. Or possibly someone saw his law enforcement vehicle in the driveway and hated cops and just attacked him. But the disguise points away from that and more towards a place of a very planned and premeditated attack. It also suggests that the person may have thought Johnny wouldn't open the door if they showed up just who they were. It could also mean that the person knew Johnny had company and several others in the home with him that night, maybe somebody who could recognize him. The hard hat aligned with the power company line that was said when the doorbell rang. Police traced the origin of the hard hat, which had a $6 sticker on it and a strip of green plastic marking tape. Police were able to determine that it had been manufactured in 1979 in Georgia and used at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, and then subsequently sold at a military surplus store in Baltimore. It was estimated that it could have been purchased from as early as 1981 by whoever had it. Little was able to be found out about the wig and sunglasses, and some sources even reference a fake mustache, but I couldn't verify that as much. Whatever the case may be, those items are still in evidence storage. There is one other thought that exists out there, that those items may have been planted there to think it was a disguise or to throw investigators off by making them devote so much time and lose focus on what the real situation was because they're busy investigating where that hard hat was manufactured, and maybe it had nothing to do with the crime at all. But we'll kind of revisit that theory a little more later. Another thing I wanted to talk about is what Johnny was wearing and the different ways this is reported. Some sources state that he was just in a pair of Adidas athletic shorts. Some say he was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and some go as far as saying he was in shorts, a t-shirt, and sneakers. The clothing could be chalked up to a pajama preference and how someone likes to sleep, so that doesn't take up too much of my attention, but the sneakers do. Who throws sneakers on to answer their door in the middle of the night? If he was so half asleep that he just opened the door without even putting the light on in the foyer, or any other light for that matter, why stop to put your shoes on? I think it's an important question and one that hasn't clearly been consistently answered. In the 6 months after Johnny Bowman's murder, the leads of the investigation shared all the work their team had been doing. They had been working 12-hour days for months, and their investigation spanned across 41 states. Why such a large geographic region, you ask? Well, they looked into anybody Johnny Bowman had issued a ticket to or arrested in the 18 months leading up to his death. Because Johnny was assigned to highway duty, mostly on Interstates 95 and 66, he pulled over a lot of out-of-state drivers. They tracked them down, established alibis for them, and that didn't lead anywhere. In fact, they found that even people who had received tickets from him didn't hold ill will. They just said he was a nice guy and polite in their traffic stops. They retraced every movement, literally his hour-to-hour activities he did in the few weeks leading up to his death, looking to see if Johnny had any sort of weird habits or patterns they could pick up on that would have led him to have an interaction with someone or piece together any type of clue, but that led nowhere. 2 long years would pass. Terry and Nikki moved out of the townhome immediately after Johnny's death and tried piecing together a new life. And the community waited for the case to be solved. Johnny was and still is the only state trooper in Virginia killed where the case hasn't been solved. And given the weird chain of events, they really thought it would happen fast. But in August of '86, investigators held a press conference where they announced that they had been doing 24-hour surveillance on a suspect and that they anticipated an arrest soon. They wouldn't name the suspect at the time, but this raised hopes that an arrest was imminent. Then, in November of that same year, they publicly named their suspect, and the name shocked everybody. In November of 1986, lead investigator Robert C. Martin said police were 99.4% sure that they knew who carried out the murder of Trooper Johnny Bowman. And the person they named was none other than his friend and colleague, Perry Worrell. Perry and Johnny had served in the Marines together and then joined forces as state troopers. Perry had married Terry Bowman's good friend, Melanie, who was the one that was over visiting that evening before Terry had driven her home. Perry was the same man who could not even finish his thoughts to reporters when talking about his friend when interviewed at the time of the funeral. So what exactly made Robert C. Martin and his team point the finger at Perry Worrell? Well, he described it as, quote, the totality of circumstances. You see, Perry had been placed on administrative leave just a few weeks after Johnny's murder. He had been described as a ticking time bomb and was said to be very emotionally off in the days and weeks following the murder. Perry Worrell's lawyer, a man named Philip J. Hirschkopf, maintained Perry's innocence, saying his client had no idea about who killed his friend Johnny Bowman and that he certainly didn't have anything to do with it. He stated that Perry Worrell was on leave from the department and it had nothing to do with misconduct, but rather that he was on medical leave due to being so distraught over the death of his friend. Martin, on the other hand, went on to say that he believes the murder had to do with a personal dispute between Bowman, his wife Terry, and the assailant, that they were all very well acquainted with one another, and he was specific in saying that it was not a love triangle. He shared that despite putting these pieces together, he and the prosecution team had not filed for a grand jury indictment because they felt they did not have sufficient evidence to bring it to trial. He scoffed at the idea of a cover-up or any embarrassment on the department, saying, quote, "I don't care if he's a member of this department or any other. Murder is murder. I'm not concerned about embarrassment to the department. We've always had a history of cleaning our own house," end quote. Worrell did match the profile of the FBI that they had determined about the killer, which said that the suspect would have become increasingly anxious and depressed, unable to cope with his crime. The profile also shared that the suspect probably regrets his acts. He may be increasingly prone to violence and could turn upon any associate whom he thinks has been disloyal. Robert C. Martin told the Washington Post that he was nearly certain at how the crime played out and that they just did not have the evidence to prove it. Another state police investigator named Ralph Marshall told the Post, quote, "I'm almost 100% convinced, certainly beyond any reasonable doubt." Paul Ebert, who was the Prince William County prosecutor at the time, agreed that they didn't have enough to prosecute. Martin told the Post that more than one person knew who did this and what happened, and Ebert emphasized that if these people came forward, they would be treated fairly. Around the same time, it came out that those closest to the case did not believe that the chain of events occurred as reported. It's unclear which part they did not believe, but prosecutor Paul Ebert told the Washington Post that he specifically was skeptical that anybody announced that they were from the power company. It's funny, I was deep reading a message board. I can't remember if it was Reddit or a message board actually, but either way, it was on this case, and someone local to the area was talking about who served the area for utilities and electricity at the time. And for the electricity company, so I live in Rochester, New York, and I would never refer to ours as the power company, nor would they announce themselves that way. It would just be, "I'm from RG&E," or "RG&E came to my house." And this poster shared a similar sentiment that nobody in that area would have referred to that utility worker that way, but rather the company that served the area. So that's just food for thought. But if, as investigators, you're questioning the chain of events, then that implies that you feel that some of those witnesses know something different than what they're reporting, or that they're involved themselves. That includes Johnny's wife Terry or his brother Bobby. And related to that, Perry Worrell is a white man. Bobby stood by that the man he scuffled with was a large black man. Now, I want to be fair here. I am not saying that anybody in that house had anything to do with it. Terry Bowman was interviewed 20 years after the murder by the Washington Post, and she talked about how traumatic that night was and how she still has images of it in her mind constantly. There's a memorial page set up for Johnny Bowman and other fallen officers, and over the years, Terry's left messages on there. As recently as 2020, on the 36th anniversary of his murder, she wrote the following: 36 years ago, you were taken from us, and your killer still remains free. You will never be forgotten, Johnny. Nikki and I think of you every day and wonder how your murder remains unsolved. I pray every night for answers, in hope of your case being closed and your killer being brought to justice. I hope before I leave this world that Nikki and I get the closure we have longed for the past 36 years. Rest in peace until we meet again. Johnny's wife, Terry Bowman, was never publicly considered a suspect, but was also never publicly cleared, at least from what I could find. In November of '86, at the time that Worrell was announced as a suspect, his lawyer told the press that the last time he had spoken to Perry Worrell was indirectly in August of that year when the press conference was held about how police had someone under constant surveillance. The lawyer, Hirschkopf, said that at the time, Melanie Worrell reached out to him alongside Johnny's widow, Terry, to report that police were harassing them, and that Hirschkopf told police that if they didn't stop, he'd have to take some action, and that after that it died down. That joint phone call is, of course, interesting and something to just take note of. The timing of announcing Worrell as a suspect was interesting because he was currently in the hospital in serious but stable condition. He had fully left the police force after his admin leave and gotten into the tow truck business. He had been responding to a disabled car on the side of the highway off-ramp when a third vehicle, driven by someone who fell asleep at the wheel, crashed into them and pinned Worrell between his wrecker and the disabled vehicle. He was severely injured with a broken leg amongst many other injuries and ended up being in the hospital for a while and having lifelong injuries that impacted his ability to have employment for a long time. As police announced him as a suspect, Hirschkopf told the press, quote, "I know of no fact, no evidence, and no motive that would link Worrell to this crime. His wife and he have both sweared they were home in bed together. I think the police are grabbing at straws. It certainly is not normal police work. If they were 99% sure, they would have arrested someone a long time ago." End quote. Despite the promise of these leads, more time would pass, and with it, the case would grow cold. In 1989, Johnny Bowman's father passed away. In 1990, his mother gave permission to exhume his body. The police were hoping to find any knife fragments that might still be there. While they were unsuccessful in doing that, they did say they found additional information that would be helpful to the investigation. His mother, Dawn, told the Potomac News that her husband died before getting answers, something that he longed for. Dawn broke her silence, giving a fiery interview to the newspaper. She talked about how her two surviving sons, including Bobby, who was there that night, still live nearby to her and that they collectively lean on each other to navigate the grief and the bitterness. She said, quote, "It's a horrible thing that they have been trying to keep a secret, and it's horrible that the family knows who did it. It's a horrible thing to live with each day." The implication there was that she believed it was Perry Worrell. She said her son was a good boy who wouldn't hurt a soul. He would do his job, but he was respectful. And then she dropped a bombshell. She shared that she had her own theory at how the murder took place, and that she didn't believe it played out at all how it was described. She believed the assailants, plural, knew Johnny and were already inside the house at the time of the attack, and that her son was killed because he had information that would incriminate the people involved in his death. She then spoke of her granddaughter, Nikki, who was now 7 at the time of the interview, and she said, quote, "If she's got any of Johnny in her, and I know she does, she won't stop until she gets some answers. When something like this happens, children have a way of growing up knowing." And wow, was Dawn Bowman prophetic, because that's exactly how it played out. Nikki Bowman decided to follow in her father's footsteps in law enforcement. At age 31, the same age as her father when he died, she was sworn in as an officer for the Manassas Police Department. She doesn't work on her father's case because that, of course, would be a conflict of interest, but she's a fierce advocate. And just as her grandmother predicted, there are pieces that just don't add up to her. In 2018, she did an interview with the FBI that I have linked in the show notes, and she said, quote, "He answers the door and then is immediately ambushed. The whole event, from what I'm understanding of, took place in the foyer. He was stabbed somewhere between 40 and 45 times throughout his entire body. I've always wondered, especially now being in the field myself, I would either answer the door with some type of protection, or I'm not going to answer the door at all. It's one of those two things. Or I'll call it in. Hey, there's some guy, some girl, whatever, on my front doorstep. I don't know them. It's 4 a.m. Can you send somebody by? It's just off. There's just something off, which is why I feel like maybe the story that's out there is not actually what happened. End quote. Nikki is pleading with those who have answers to come forward. The case was reopened 20 years ago in 2005 and has had people working it on and off since. Forensic evidence from 1984 has been resubmitted several times now as forensics advance. And we don't know what exactly the evidence is, just that it exists and could tell a story. Interestingly enough, since the forensic advancements, police have backed off on their public certainty of Perry Worrell as the perpetrator. At this point, the discussion on Perry would either be to solidify him as their guy and close the case, or exonerate him publicly because he can't be put on trial. He died in 2015. Johnny's brother Bobby died in 2005, and Bobby's wife Doris Bowman, who was in the house that night, died in 2014. Johnny's mom, Dawn, died in 2012. Terry is still alive, and Melanie is a bit off the grid and distanced from the case at this point. There are some interesting messaging threads out there related to this case that discuss Melanie and Terry. There's also a Facebook post from someone who claims to be a good friend of Johnny's and a cousin of Perry Worrell's. He claims to know what happened and shares how he has hit a brick wall because of a large-scale cover-up. He claims to have been polygraphed himself in this investigation, and that amongst other things. Because it's all speculation, I'm not going to mention any of the specifics on this podcast, but it's there if you fall into the rabbit hole on this case. And information being out there is what seems to be a common theme in this case. Nikki stands by that there are people out there that know what happened. So with that, I'll end this episode with a quote from Nikki in her interview with the FBI. There are people that were here that are either still here or maybe have moved somewhere else, but word travels fast in small communities like this, and I would find it very hard to believe that there's not someone or multiple people that know what happened that day. Whether it was by word of mouth, they were there, someone that was there told them, but somebody knows something. To me, there's no way that that's not possible. And I would just hope that they could find it in their hearts to do the right thing. If you are that person and know something about what happened to Johnny Bowman back in 1984, please contact the FBI at 1-800-225-5324 or the Virginia State Police at 703-803-2676. You can also go online and leave tips at tips.fbi.gov. It should be noted that the FBI is offering a $50,000 reward for information and that anybody can remain anonymous. This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you wish to support the show financially, you can join my Spreaker supporter club in the bottom of the show notes. There's a link there. This just helps me with the costs to keep growing this podcast. But all support is invaluable to me, and word of mouth, social media shares, and reviews are huge. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. And as always, I appreciate you listening and tuning in, and join me again next Monday.